When Ibrahim Traoré took the oath as Burkina Faso's supreme leader in 2022, many outside observers dismissed him as just another military figure fueled by impulse, another name in a long line of coup leaders. But from the very start, Traoré proved to be something different. His vision was clear, not just to seize power, but to launch an ethical revolution that would cleanse a deeply corrupted system and restore dignity to a nation rich in resources, yet mired in poverty and conflict. Burkina Faso stands at a crossroads. With over 20 million people and some of Africa's richest gold reserves, it remains trapped in the vicious cycle of corruption, insecurity, and economic hardship. Traoré's bold declaration that our most dangerous enemy is corruption within challenges decades of neglect and foreign exploitation. Can this young leader truly break the chains of systemic corruption and rebuild his country's future? Do you believe President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies can overcome entrenched interests and bring lasting change? Subscribe to the channel and join us as we explore the brave path of a leader determined to fight not only foreign enemies, but also the corruption within his own government. Burkina Faso's paradox is striking. A nation blessed with some of Africa's richest gold reserves, yet struggling with extreme poverty and insecurity. This contradiction has long puzzled experts and observers. The answer lies deep within a system plagued by systemic corruption that siphons wealth away from its people and perpetuates inequality. For decades, political and military elites have exploited the country's resources for personal gain. Mining contracts were often sealed behind closed doors, accompanied by secret kickbacks and off-the-books transactions. Regional commanders, high-ranking generals, and government ministers frequently blurred the lines between state duties and private profiteering. It was not uncommon for military leaders to control gold businesses, using their positions to secure lucrative deals with foreign corporations, mostly French, Canadian, and Chinese firms, while ordinary citizens remained trapped in poverty. This internal exploitation, combined with external pressures from multinational companies, created a swamp of corruption that undermined national development. The wealth of Burkina Faso flowed out, while its people bore the costs of poverty, lack of infrastructure, and ongoing security threats from terrorist groups. When Ibrahim Traoré assumed leadership in 2022, he recognized this corruption as the greatest internal enemy the nation faced. His first public message was clear and uncompromising. Our most dangerous enemy does not come from outside, but lies within the state apparatus: corruption. This declaration was more than rhetoric. It set the tone for an ethical revolution aimed at cleansing the government before tackling terrorism and poverty. Traoré understood that no external threat could be defeated if the state itself was compromised. Shortly after assuming power, President Ibrahim Traoré embarked on a bold, uncompromising campaign to cleanse Burkina Faso's deeply corrupted state apparatus. Understanding that reform must begin from within, he sent shockwaves through the military establishment and bureaucracy alike. One of Traoré's earliest and most surprising moves was ordering an internal investigation into the military sphere, where many believed loyalty would protect senior officers. Yet, within weeks, 5 high-ranking generals were arrested, including General Amadou Zida, a key figure in previous power transitions. These generals faced accusations of betraying the nation by acting as intermediaries who sold Burkina Faso's gold mines to foreign companies at rock-bottom prices. They were also implicated in kickbacks, funneled through offshore accounts, and nepotism involving relatives placed in lucrative positions. This internal cut into his own body, as Traoré described it, demonstrated his readiness to challenge even his closest comrades for the sake of national renewal. The establishment of a special investigation unit directly reporting to him underscored the seriousness of this purge. But Traoré's fight against corruption extended beyond the military. In the civilian bureaucracy, over 134 senior officials were dismissed or suspended in the first 6 months, including deputy ministers and financial directors. 2 scandals stood out: the Inata mine case, where millions disappeared during contract renewal with a Canadian company, and the uncovering of a ghost budget riddled with unaccounted expenses labeled as foreign trips and special bonuses. Yet, amidst this cleansing, Traoré showed discernment. Rather than sweeping clean indiscriminately, he retained individuals of integrity, such as Salimata Kabore, who was appointed to supervise government ministries with a mandate to uphold transparency and accountability. This phase of Traoré's reform ignited mixed reactions: surprise, hope, and unease within Burkina Faso, while international observers watched closely, aware that these moves challenged entrenched networks of power and influence. The purge, launched by President Ibrahim Traoré, sent ripples far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Domestically, the bold actions stirred a mix of hope and apprehension. Many citizens, long weary of endemic corruption, welcomed the cleanup with cautious optimism. Seeing in Traoré a leader willing to hold powerful figures accountable, civil society groups praised his decisive steps, viewing them as a turning point in restoring integrity to public institutions. However, the purge also triggered significant resistance. Those with entrenched interests, both within the military and civilian bureaucracy, pushed back quietly but persistently. Some officials undermined reforms through passive obstruction or covert lobbying, while others openly criticized Traoré's measures as destabilizing or heavy-handed. This internal opposition complicated the process of reform and exposed the deep-rooted nature of corruption networks. Internationally, reactions were complex. Western governments and financial institutions, notably the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank, expressed concerns over the suspension of mining contracts and the arrests of high-ranking officials. These institutions emphasized the importance of respecting existing agreements and cautioned against rapid policy shifts that might unsettle economic stability. Nonetheless, many African leaders and regional organizations viewed Traoré's stance as a bold assertion of sovereignty and a necessary step to reclaim control over national resources. Despite pressures, Traoré remained resolute, framing his campaign as a fight for justice and national dignity. His message was clear: we cannot build a country on the foundation of corruption and injustice. This uncompromising position galvanized supporters and positioned him as a symbol of ethical leadership in a region grappling with similar challenges. As the purge unfolded, it became evident that Traoré's anti-corruption drive was more than political theater. It was the first phase of a broader transformation aiming to rebuild Burkina Faso's institutions from the ground up. The sweeping anti-corruption campaign, led by President Ibrahim Traoré, has had profound civil and political consequences in Burkina Faso. On the societal level, the purge stirred both hope and uncertainty. For many citizens, long frustrated by decades of abuse and exploitation, Traoré's bold measures represented a beacon of hope and opportunity for renewal and justice. This renewed trust inspired increased civic engagement, with people more willing to participate in oversight initiatives and demand accountability. Politically, the reforms disrupted long-standing power structures. The dismissal of high-ranking officials and generals destabilized entrenched networks, reshaping the political landscape. Traoré's insistence on loyalty to the people, rather than to individuals or factions, challenged traditional patronage systems that had maintained control through clientelism and corruption. The rise of new, integrity-focused leaders within the government signaled a shift toward more accountable governance. By appointing figures such as Salimata Kabore to oversee government transparency, Traoré cultivated a culture where ethical conduct became a criterion for leadership, not mere loyalty or influence. However, these changes also created political tensions. Some factions within the military and civil service resisted reforms, fearing loss of privileges and influence. This internal friction manifested in both overt opposition and subtle sabotage, threatening stability. Moreover, the reshuffling of elites opened space for political rivals and power struggles, complicating governance. The reforms also inspired civil society organizations and grassroots movements, which gained momentum as citizens felt empowered to hold their leaders accountable. This resurgence of active citizenry fostered a new political culture emphasizing transparency, participation, and justice. Yet, despite these advances, the path forward remains challenging. The balance between reform and stability is delicate, and sustaining momentum requires ongoing commitment from all sectors of society. The ethical revolution led by Ibrahim Traoré has begun to reshape social norms in Burkina Faso. The visible crackdown on corruption sent a powerful message that no one, regardless of rank or status, is above the law. This shift encouraged ordinary citizens to speak out against injustice and corruption, slowly breaking the culture of silence that had long shielded corrupt elites. Community leaders and local activists found new platforms and legitimacy, collaborating with government efforts to monitor public spending and report abuses. These grassroots initiatives strengthened the social fabric and built bridges between citizens and the state, fostering a sense of shared responsibility for national development. However, this transformation is not without challenges. Some citizens remain skeptical, wary of promises from political leaders, given the country's history of failed reforms. The economic difficulties and security threats from ongoing terrorist violence further complicate social cohesion. For many, the benefits of the anti-corruption drive have yet to translate into tangible improvements in daily life. Politically, Traoré faces the delicate task of managing expectations while maintaining unity. The purge and reforms risk alienating powerful interest groups, which could provoke unrest or attempts to undermine his authority. Balancing reform with political stability requires careful navigation and constant dialogue with diverse stakeholders. Internationally, Burkina Faso's stance has drawn both support and criticism. While many admire Traoré's courage, others worry that aggressive reforms might destabilize foreign investment and regional security cooperation. The government must therefore communicate its vision clearly and build alliances that respect national sovereignty while ensuring economic and security partnerships remain strong. In sum, Ibrahim Traoré's anti-corruption campaign has sparked a pivotal shift in Burkina Faso's civil and political landscape. It has energized citizen participation and challenged entrenched power, but the road ahead demands resilience, transparency, and inclusive governance to secure lasting change. From the viewpoint of the United States, Burkina Faso's anti-corruption campaign under President Ibrahim Traoré represents both an opportunity and a complex challenge. American policymakers and analysts recognize that corruption in West Africa undermines regional stability, fuels insecurity, and hampers economic development issues that align closely with U.S. strategic interests. Traoré's firm stance against entrenched corruption is welcomed by many U.S. observers who see in it a potential model for strengthening governance in a region beset by insurgency and political fragility. The campaign's emphasis on transparency, rule of law, and accountability resonates with U.S. efforts to promote democratic values and good governance in Africa. However, the U.S. approach is cautious. Concerns arise about the methods used, particularly the sweeping purges and the suspension of key foreign mining contracts. American officials worry that abrupt policy shifts could destabilize Burkina Faso's economy or alienate international partners critical for development aid and security cooperation. Moreover, the geopolitical context complicates U.S. perceptions. Burkina Faso's moves to curtail foreign company influence, especially those from Western nations, are viewed with a mix of understanding and apprehension. The U.S. seeks to balance support for anti-corruption reforms with protecting American investments and maintaining influence in a competitive global environment where China and other powers are increasingly active. Diplomatic engagement emphasizes dialogue, encouraging Burkina Faso to uphold existing agreements while pursuing reforms transparently. This approach aims to support Traoré's goals without risking economic disruption or political instability that could undermine broader regional security objectives. Outside the United States, global reactions to Ibrahim Traoré's anti-corruption reforms have been sharply divided, revealing deep geopolitical tensions. In Europe, especially France, the former colonial power Traoré's campaign has been met with skepticism and unease. The removal of French troops, the cancellation of mining concessions held by French companies, and the strong nationalist rhetoric from Ouagadougou have sparked a media backlash, portraying Traoré as a populist strongman rather than a legitimate reformer. French business interests, particularly in the mining and infrastructure sectors, have lobbied against Traoré's policies, citing concerns about legal certainty and investment safety. Meanwhile, French officials have publicly questioned the transparency of some arrests and purges, suggesting they may be politically motivated, a critique that ignores decades of silence over systemic looting under previous pro-Western governments. In contrast, many African nations and leaders have expressed admiration for Traoré's boldness. He is increasingly seen as a symbol of a new generation of African leadership, assertive, anti-colonial, and committed to reclaiming sovereignty over national wealth. Countries like Mali, Niger, Guinea, and Chad have voiced support, with some even adopting similar rhetoric against corruption and foreign dependency. This emerging bloc, often referred to as the Pan-African Vanguard, views Traoré's example as a path toward regional self-determination. China and Russia, meanwhile, have seized the opportunity to strengthen ties with Burkina Faso. While their motives are strategic, both powers have publicly praised Traoré's efforts to combat corruption and reclaim national resources. These gestures of support have raised alarms in Western capitals, where fears grow that Burkina Faso and the region more broadly may be pivoting away from traditional Western influence. For global observers, Traoré's reforms signal more than an internal political shift. They are part of a broader realignment in West Africa, where the fight against corruption is increasingly tied to questions of sovereignty, independence, and who truly benefits from Africa's wealth. The world is watching, not just to see if Traoré will succeed, but to see if a new political order in Africa is emerging. The anti-corruption campaign of President Ibrahim Traoré offers critical lessons not only for Burkina Faso, but for the African continent and the global south at large. First and foremost, Traoré has demonstrated that genuine reform must begin at the top. By setting a personal example of modest living, rejecting luxury, and publicly declaring his commitment to moral leadership, he has reset expectations for political behavior. In a region where leaders have often enriched themselves at the expense of their people, this shift in posture is revolutionary. Secondly, the campaign reveals the importance of political will. While many governments make rhetorical commitments to fighting corruption, few follow through with the kind of institutional and judicial backing seen in Burkina Faso. Traoré's establishment of a special anti-corruption task force, direct oversight of sensitive cases, and insistence on transparency in public contracts show that reform requires more than slogans it demands. Structural and legal tools empowered to act without fear. Another key lesson is the necessity of engaging the public. Traoré's government made deliberate efforts to involve civil society, media, and community leaders in monitoring corruption and reporting abuses. This created a feedback loop that increased citizen trust and participation, making it harder for corrupt networks to operate in secrecy. However, the most powerful lesson may be this: fighting corruption is not merely a legal or administrative challenge, it is a cultural and psychological battle. It requires changing the very norms of how power, wealth, and responsibility are understood in society. Traoré's campaign has begun to shift this mindset, challenging generations of fatalism and fear that once paralyzed reform. Still, the campaign also illustrates the risks. Reforms, if too abrupt or isolated, can provoke backlash, economic shocks, and political sabotage. For other leaders seeking to emulate Traoré, the lesson is to pair moral clarity with strategic planning, building alliances, ensuring communication, and preparing for resistance from the old guard. These lessons, drawn from Burkina Faso's ongoing experiment in self-cleansing, could reshape how nations approach corruption, not as a permanent curse, but as a fight that, though difficult, can be won. Burkina Faso now stands at a crossroads. Having launched one of the boldest anti-corruption campaigns in recent African history, the country faces a rare window of opportunity to reshape its institutions and national identity. One immediate opportunity lies in rebuilding public trust. Years of exploitation and broken promises had left Burkinabe citizens disillusioned with government. Traoré's crackdown has begun to reverse this trend, providing a foundation to restore faith in public service. If his administration can demonstrate consistent justice, reinvest confiscated wealth into local development, and ensure fairness in state contracts, it will further deepen legitimacy and stability. Economically, the purge has opened space for a national reorientation. By terminating exploitative mining contracts and holding foreign companies accountable, the government can now prioritize local content laws, strengthen domestic industries, and invest in infrastructure that benefits the rural majority. There is an opportunity to turn Burkina Faso's natural resources from gold to manganese into engines for inclusive growth rather than elite enrichment. Internationally, Burkina Faso's assertive posture offers a chance to redefine its foreign partnerships. Rather than relying solely on aid or concessions from former colonial powers, Traoré's government can build strategic alliances based on mutual respect and shared interests. South-South cooperation with nations like Algeria, Brazil, Turkey, and Indonesia can provide investment without neo-colonial strings attached. Meanwhile, Burkina Faso's rising moral authority in West Africa positions it as a voice for regional integrity and reform. On a deeper level, the purge presents a cultural opportunity. If the fight against corruption becomes embedded in schools, the media, and the arts, it can help shape a generation that sees ethics and service as patriotic duties. This could spark a long-term transformation of civic values where integrity becomes the social norm, not the exception. Of course, the road ahead is filled with dangers. Counter-reform forces are regrouping, economic pressures remain acute, and global power blocs are watching closely, seeking to sway Burkina Faso's trajectory. To succeed, Traoré's administration must remain transparent, listen to grassroots voices, avoid the traps of authoritarianism, and stay rooted in the revolutionary spirit that gave birth to this movement. The fight is far from over, but for the first time in decades, Burkina Faso is writing a new future with its own pen. What we are witnessing in Burkina Faso is more than a government purge, it is a moral and political revolution. Ibrahim Traoré has stepped onto the global stage not just as a soldier or head of state, but as a symbol of uncompromising ethical leadership. In a world where cynicism often rules and corruption is treated as inevitable, Traore stands as living proof that radical honesty and courage can still be weapons of transformation. His war is not only against embezzlers or corrupt ministers, it is against an entire mindset, one that says Africa must remain poor while its leaders get rich, that international contracts must exploit rather than uplift, that young Africans must flee to Europe for hope instead of building nations with their own hands. By confronting these dogmas head-on, Traoré is offering a blueprint not just for Burkina Faso, but for any country that dares to dream of clean governance and self-respect. Yet, this story is unfinished. The forces of corruption do not vanish overnight. The international vultures still circle, internal resistance still brews, and expectations, especially among the youth, there higher than ever. Ibrahim Traoré's greatest challenge may not be defeating his enemies, but proving that institutional change can outlast revolutionary charisma. To those in the global south watching closely, Burkina Faso is now a case study in possibility. What happens when a young leader puts national dignity above personal gain? What happens when the people believe again? And what happens when Africa decides that its wealth is not for sale? Only time will tell whether this anti-corruption campaign will deliver a new political order or become just another chapter in a long struggle. But one thing is clear: the flame that has been lit in Ouagadougou is not easily extinguished. Whether it spreads or is smothered will depend on what Traoré does next and whether the people continue to stand with him. If you believe in the power of truth, justice, and African self-determination, this is your story. Share it, discuss it, defend it, because the revolution against corruption has begun not with bullets, but with principles.